The Astronomicon flickers. A billion souls scream in unison as the Emperor's light begins to fail. On a million worlds, navigators clutch their third eyes in agony. On Terra, the sky splits open. Reality tears like wet parchment. The metallic tang of blood fills the air as demons pour through the wound in the heavens. The last custodian stands atop the Eternity Gate, his golden armor slick with gore, his spear crackling with dying energy. Behind him, the golden throne sputters and hisses. Even in death, I still serve. He whispers, as the tide of writhing flesh surges forward, the Emperor's withered corpse slumps forward. 10,000 years of agony, finally ended. Darkness falls. A child huddles beneath rubble on what was once holy Terra, watching as the impossible architecture of the warp begins to replace reality. The ground beneath her trembles, warm and wet, as though Terra itself has become a living, breathing entity. She covers her ears but cannot block out the sounds, the wet, slithering noises of things moving in the darkness. The sickly, sweet stench of decay mingles with the metallic bite of blood and the acrid smell of burning promethium. Across the stars, Imperial ships drift aimlessly through the void. The Astronomicon's death has blinded them all. Crews madden as the Geller fields fail one by one, the protective bubbles of reality collapsing as the Immaterium rushes in. On a nameless agri-world, a farmer looks up as the stars begin to change position. The constellations twist into new, impossible patterns, faces leering down at him. The crops in his field turn to flesh before his eyes, pulsing and writhing. In the void between galaxies, ancient beings stir. The tyrannid hive mind recoils from the psychic scream of humanity's death. The silent king's dynasty awakens fully, their mechanical bodies humming with grim purpose. The galaxy burns as the four gods laugh. Khorne's brass citadel grows with each skull added to his throne. Nurgle's garden blooms with new diseases. Tzeentch's impossible library expands with the knowledge of a fallen Imperium. And Slaanesh dances amidst the agony of trillions. The child on Terra watches as a figure approaches through the mist, beautiful and terrible, wearing the face of her dead mother. It extends a hand that shifts between claw and caress. "Come, little one," it whispers in a voice like broken glass. The old universe is dead. What glories await in the new one we shall build from its corpse? What happens when the thin veil between reality and nightmare finally tears completely? In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there is only war. But what if that war ended? Not with the triumph of humanity, but with its annihilation. The Imperium of Man stands as a rotting bulwark against the tides of chaos. A million worlds united under the psychic beacon of the Emperor, entombed in agony upon the golden throne. For 10,000 years, this has been the status quo. The long war, the slow, grinding stalemate between order and chaos. But what if the scales finally tipped? What if the forces of chaos, those ancient entities that dwell in the warp, Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh, achieved total victory? The question isn't merely academic, it's existential. The four chaos gods represent the darkest aspects of sentient life: rage, despair, ambition, and desire. They are mirrors, reflecting our own nature distorted to monstrous extremes. Imagine reality itself coming undone, the laws of physics warping like heated metal, the membrane between real space and the immaterium tearing open like rotted fabric. This wouldn't be conquest as we understand it. This would be transformation. The death of the Emperor would be merely the beginning. The Astronomicon, humanity's psychic lighthouse, would flicker and die. 10,000 years of nightmares would pour through the breach. Each chaos god would reshape reality according to its own twisted vision. Blood would flow like rivers for Khorne. Flesh would bloom with impossible diseases for Nurgle. Minds would fracture into labyrinthine puzzles for Tzeentch. And for Slaanesh, pleasure and pain would become one endless, screaming symphony. Billions would die in the initial onslaught. Trillions would wish they had, but some would survive. Some would adapt. Some would even thrive. The question isn't just what happens to the galaxy if chaos wins. It's what happens to humanity. What becomes of us when we're no longer human? Would we become like the citizens of the Eye of Terror, where time and space flow like disturbed water? Where mutation is a blessing and sanity a fatal weakness? Or would we become something else entirely? Something beyond comprehension? The Warhammer 40K universe stands as a warning, a dark mirror held up to our own world. It shows us what happens when hatred, fear, superstition, and cruelty become institutionalized. When survival at any cost becomes the only moral compass. In exploring what happens if chaos wins, we're really asking, what happens when our darkest impulses are given form and power? What monsters lurk within us, waiting to be unleashed? The 4 thrones of ruin await their coronation. Khorne's throne of skulls, Nurgle's throne of decay, Tzeentch's throne of change, Slaanesh's throne of excess. And as we'll see, their victory would not be the end of the story. It would be the beginning of a new and terrible chapter in the history of the galaxy. A chapter written in blood, madness, rot, and ecstasy. The craft worlds were the first to feel the veil tear open. Eldar seers dropped to their knees, blood streaming from their eyes as the psychic backlash of Chaos's victory rippled through the webway. Their screams echoed through wraithbone corridors that had stood for millennia, now vibrating with wrongness. "It is done," whispered Farseer Macha, her fingers trembling against the smooth floor of the divination chamber. Terra has fallen. The Chaos God's attention turned hungrily toward the Eldar, the race whose excess had once birthed Slaanesh. The Prince of Pleasure had waited 10,000 years to complete the feast begun during the fall. One by one, the craft worlds were hunted. Not quickly, not mercifully. Nurgle's plague seeped through psychic barriers, turning Wraithbone black with corruption. Khorne's legions materialized from blood-red tears in reality, butchering and collecting skulls for their master. On Ulthwi, the avatar of Cain stood defiant against a tide of demons. For 17 days, the molten god fought without rest. On the 18th day, Tzeentch himself reached through reality and shattered the avatar like glass. The surviving Eldar fled deeper into the webway, but there was nowhere the Chaos Gods could not follow now. Ancient gates collapsed. Hidden worlds were exposed. The Harlequins made their final performance in the Black Library, dancing even as their sanctuary burned around them. The Dark Eldar fared no better. Kamara, the Dark City, became Slaanesh's playground. Its dimensional pockets collapsed one by one, spilling screaming Drukhari into the warp. Their souls, so carefully hoarded and protected, became the sweetest delicacy at Slaanesh's banquet. Far from this extinction, across the galaxy, the Tau Empire faced a different fate. The young Xenos had barely comprehended the Immaterium's dangers when reality split open above their sept worlds. Their technology, so advanced in material science, offered no protection against the metaphysical horror pouring through. The Ethereals were the first targeted. Tzeentch found their mind control pheromones a delightful toy to subvert. Within weeks, The ruling caste led their people in mass rituals that opened further warp breaches. The fire warriors fought bravely, their pulse rifles flashing against demonic hordes. But without souls bright enough to interest the chaos gods, the Tau were not granted the mercy of death and consumption. Instead, they became slaves. Their technical brilliance was harnessed by the dark mechanicum. Their bodies were warped by chaos sorcery, third arms growing from chests, eyes multiplying across blue skin. Their greater good philosophy was twisted into worship of the Four. In the forges of a conquered Tau sept, a former Earth-caste engineer named Fol watched his hands, now tipped with metallic claws, assemble weapons that defied physical laws. His mind screamed in horror, but his body obeyed its new masters. "The flesh is weak," he whispered, the mantra forced upon him by his Iron Warrior's overseers. "But chaos is eternal." He looked up at his creation, a fusion of Tau plasma technology and warp-infused machinery. The demon bound within its core stared back through the barrel with hungry eyes. Fol wondered if any of his species remained untainted anywhere in the galaxy. But even this thought was dangerous. The gods were always listening now, and the Chaos Lords had only begun their grand work of remaking all creation in their image. When the Eye of Terror swallowed reality whole, not everything fell at once. Scattered across the dying Imperium, islands of resistance remained, defiant candles in an infinite night. On Cadia's shattered remnants, the last regiment of Kasrkin fought from the broken spires of what was once Kasr Kraf. Their fingers bled on trigger guards worn smooth, their eyes sunken deep into radiation-scarred faces. They no longer slept. Sleep meant dreams, and dreams belonged to chaos now. 341 days, whispered Colonel Martin, his voice scraping like metal on stone. 341 days since the fall. Through cracked augmetic lenses, he watched the horizon writhe with mutated flesh and twisted metal. The air tasted of copper and decay, each breath burning the lungs with unnatural heat. Screams echoed constantly. Some from the approaching hordes, others from within their own bunkers as soldiers succumbed to madness. Elsewhere, the craft worlds of the Eldar drifted through the warp-tainted void, their infinity circuits glowing white-hot as they strained against the psychic pressure. The webway cracked and splintered, forcing the ancient race to seal off entire sections of their labyrinthine network. On craft world Ulthway, Farseer Maychew's tears crystallized on her cheeks as she witnessed the future. Not the branching paths she once navigated with practiced skill, but a single, inevitable darkness. "We foresaw this," she whispered to the spirit stones arrayed before her. "We always knew this might come. What we never saw was what comes after." The temperature inside the dome dropped suddenly, frost forming on her lips as she spoke. The wraithbone walls groaned under pressure never meant to exist in this reality. Deep in the Ultima Segmentum, a cluster of imperial worlds formed the Imperium Secundus, a desperate echo of Guilliman's contingency from millennia past. Space Marine chapters, regardless of founding or doctrine, stood shoulder to shoulder with Imperial Guard regiments and even Xenos allies. On the command deck of the battle barge, Oath of Moment, Chapter Master Cantor of the Crimson Fists stared at tactical displays showing warp storms consuming system after system. The metallic tang of recycled air couldn't mask the scent of fear permeating the ship. "The Emperor protects," muttered a chapter serf. "Does he?" Cantor's voice was barely audible. "Look around you. This is what happens when gods fail." The resistance was not just physical. On thousands of worlds, underground networks of faith persisted. Not the imperial creed, that bloated theology had collapsed with Terra, but simpler faiths. Beliefs in light, in order, in the strength of mortal hearts. These were the islands in the storm. Each one isolated, each one slowly drowning. They communicated through desperate vox bursts and ancient technologies salvaged from better days. They shared what little hope remained. But with each passing day, another island vanished beneath the crimson tide. Another bastion fell. Another light extinguished. And beyond the material realm, in the twisted heart of the warp itself, the Chaos Gods watched these final resistances with cruel amusement. They had all of eternity now, or did they? Because something stirred in the darkness between stars, something even the dark gods had not anticipated, something that made even Tzeentch's infinite eyes widen with sudden, unexpected fear. On the 10,000th year of his eternal vigil, the Golden Throne failed. The catastrophic collapse began not with a bang, but with a whisper. A hairline fracture in the ancient mechanisms that had sustained the Emperor for millennia. Tech priests scrambled across the throne room's gilded floor, their mechadendrites whipping frantically as they chanted desperate binary prayers. The air reeked of burning insulation and the metallic tang of sacred unguents boiling away. In the shadowed corners of the Sanctum Imperialis, reality itself began to fray. The warp shields are collapsing, whispered a trembling custodian, his golden armor suddenly dull under the flickering lumens. He can no longer hold back the tide. The Emperor's withered corpse, entombed for 10 millennia, shuddered. Those present would later swear they heard a sound, not physical, but psychic, that pierced every mind on Terra. A scream of rage, of failure, of final, terrible understanding. Then came the silence. The Astronomican, humanity's psychic lighthouse in the warp, flickered and died. Across the galaxy, 100,000 navigator houses clutched their third eyes in agony as the Emperor's light vanished. Millions of vessels were instantly stranded in the void between stars, their crews condemned to slow deaths or worse fates as warp predators sensed their vulnerability. On Terra itself, the skies split open. The immaterial realm, no longer held at bay by the Emperor's will, poured through like blood from a mortal wound. The temperature plummeted, then soared, as physical laws became mere suggestions. The very air seemed to crawl against human skin, probing for weaknesses, hungry for souls. In the throne room, the last custodians formed a circle around their fallen master. Their golden spears glowed with desperate defiance as reality tore apart around them. The floor beneath their feet liquefied, hardened, then shattered into crystalline patterns that reflected impossible geometries. For the Emperor, they intoned, even as their god's corpse began to slump forward, freed from the machinery that had preserved it. Above the imperial palace, the sky became a canvas of madness. Faces, billions of faces, pressed against the thinning veil between worlds. Some wept, some laughed, all hungered. The 4 Chaos Gods had waited 10,000 years for this moment, and their patience had finally been rewarded. Across Terra, cultists emerged from hiding. Many had lived entire lives in secret, waiting for this day, passing, their faith down through generations. They raised their voices in terrible harmony, welcoming their dark masters to the cradle of humanity. Deep within the imperial palace, something stirred in the Emperor's withered flesh. His eyes, closed for 10 millennia, flickered open, but the light within them was not the gold of imperial divinity. It was the crimson of fresh blood, the purple of bruised flesh the sickly green of plague, and the electric blue of forbidden knowledge. The last custodian raised his spear as the thing that had once been the master of mankind rose from the golden throne. "My lord," he whispered, as the creature turned its gaze upon him. The smile that spread across the Emperor's face was not his own. The galaxy, once unified under the Emperor's light, now lies carved into 4 distinct realms, each a nightmarish reflection of its patron god. These are not mere territories, but living hells, breathing extensions of the chaos gods themselves. In what was once Segmentum Solar, Khorne's bleeding kingdom stretches across 1,000,000 worlds. The skies rain hot copper droplets that sizzle against exposed flesh. Cities have been rebuilt as vast coliseums where the strong eternally slaughter the weak. The architecture itself pulses like veins, buildings constructed from compacted bone and sinew harvested from conquered planets. "The ground never dries," whispers a surviving remembrancer, his fingers trembling as he records these final observations. "It squelches beneath your feet, always wet with fresh blood." Nurgle's garden has consumed Segmentum Tempestus entirely. Once proud hive worlds now slouch beneath the weight of their own putrefaction. Spore forests rise from the corpses of fallen imperial titans, their canopies releasing clouds that turn skin to slime. The survivors here experience a perverse immortality, their bodies continuously rotting, yet never permitted death's release. A former inquisitor, now bloated beyond recognition, maintains his sanity just enough to document the horror. The worst part is the sound, the constant wet chewing as trillions of microbes consume everything. And the smell, like sweetness gone wrong. The Slaaneshi dominion glitters across what was Segmentum Ultima, a realm of impossible beauty and unendurable sensation. Crystal spires rise from planetary surfaces, refracting light in patterns that drive observers to ecstatic madness. The surviving populations experience pleasure so intense, it transcends into agony. Their nerves rewired to interpret all stimuli as overwhelming sensation. They flayed our emotions. Record's a blind astropath, the only way she maintains sanity. I watched an entire world orgasm itself to death when the Prince's Herald merely whispered. Most terrifying of all is Tzeentch's labyrinth, consuming Segmentum Obscurus and the Eye of Terror. Reality itself is fluid here. Gravity reverses without warning. Time flows backward, then sideways. Inhabitants find their bodies, transforming. Growing eyes where there were none, limbs twisting into tentacles, thoughts becoming physical manifestations that hunt their thinkers. A space marine, the last of his chapter, carves a final message into his rapidly mutating armor. The stars themselves rearrange nightly. We can no longer navigate. We can no longer trust our memories. I have killed myself 17 times, yet I continue to exist. Between these kingdoms lies the Screaming Veil, a turbulent warp storm where the gods' territories bleed together. Here, reality is so unstable that entire worlds appear and disappear hourly. It is here that the last organized resistance attempts to survive, jumping between temporary reality pockets. But the resistance has discovered something impossible, a pattern in the chaos. Hidden beneath the madness of these 4 kingdoms lies evidence of deliberate design. The gods aren't competing anymore. They're cooperating. And the true purpose of mankind's suffering is far worse than anyone imagined. On the fringes of what was once imperial space, the remnants of humanity huddle in fortresses of desperation. Cadia may have fallen, But scattered Imperial strongholds remain, islands of sanity in an ocean of madness. On Hydrafor, Admiral Lazarus watches from his command throne as warp storms writhe across the void screens. The taste of copper fills his mouth. The ship's recycled air carries the tang of fear sweat from his crew. 17 planetary systems still answer his hails. 17 out of thousands. We lost contact with the Ryza system at 300 hours. His second officer reports, voice cracking. That's the third Forge world this month. The fortress worlds that remain have become grotesque parodies of Imperial defense. On Mordan 4, 10 million civilians huddle behind walls manned by child soldiers with laser guns too heavy for their emaciated frames. The ground trembles constantly, not from artillery, but from the geological instability caused by reality's thinning membrane. The warp bleeds through even here, whispers Sister Amalthea, her once pristine armor now scorched and makeshift. Her fingers trace the worn purity seals on her bolter. We've performed the Emperor's benediction on 33 psychers since dawn. The executions never cease. Anyone showing signs of mutation or psychic awakening is immediately put to death. Mercy has become the swiftest blade. On what remains of Macragge, the Ultramarines' fortress monastery has become a labyrinth of desperate last stands. Captain Agamon, now chapter master of the few hundred remaining Ultramarines, kneels before the preserved corpse of Robout Guilliman. The Primarch's body, recovered after his second death fighting Magnus on Terra, lies in state, a symbol of all that has been lost. We maintain the Codex as you taught us, my lord, Agamemnon whispers, his voice echoing through marble halls designed for thousands, now walked by hundreds. Though we can no longer retake worlds, we can teach others how to resist. The surviving Imperial citizens pray not for salvation, but for a clean death. Billions have already chosen self-destruction over corruption. On Vostroya, the planetary governor activated ancient atomic weapons rather than allow the world to fall to the Neverborn. 3 billion souls, gone in flashes of cleansing fire. Yet these last bastions serve a purpose beyond mere survival. They are repositories of knowledge, each one preserving different fragments of humanity's past. On Gathalamor, tech priests work feverishly to record Imperial technology onto materials that resist warp corruption. On Varsavia, remembrancers document Imperial history in bunkers a mile beneath the surface. These are not strongholds of hope, but of defiance. The Imperial Aquila may be broken, but its talons still draw blood. In his meditation chamber on the battle barge, Implacable, Chapter Master Agamemnon reviews tactical data from across the shrinking realm of order. His augmetic eye whirs as it processes casualty reports, territory lost, and the dwindling supplies of gene seed. Inform all remaining chapter masters, he commands the waiting serf. Protocol Omega is now in effect. The serf's face pales. Protocol Omega, the contingency plan for which they had all prayed would never be needed. But what none of them realized was that the true purpose of these last bastions wasn't to win a war already lost. The gods of chaos, once confined to the warp, now stride across reality itself. Their great game, that eternal contest for supremacy, expands beyond imagination as the material universe becomes their new playground. Ziench's laughter echoes across 1,000 worlds as plans millennia in the making bear fruit. Crystal spires of impossible geometry rise from the ashes of imperial planets, their surfaces crawling with eyes that weep equations into reality. Knowledge flows like blood through new veins of existence. The Imperium believed knowledge was to be feared, whispers a lord of change to kneeling psychers. Now witness the truth they denied you. But enlightenment comes at terrible cost. Those who drink too deeply from Tzeentch's wells of knowledge find their bodies twisting, mutating, flesh becoming a canvas for chaotic inspiration. Screams of revelation mix with screams of agony. Nurgle's gardens spread across once verdant, agri worlds. The stench of sweet decay permeates everything, the smell of life and death in perfect, putrid harmony. Plague marines tend to fields of bubbling flesh crops, their rusted armor dripping with contagions unknown even to the Chaos gods before their victory. The Death Guard, once the Emperor's most resilient sons, now shepherd humanity toward Grandfather Nurgle's embrace. Their leader, Mortarion, sits upon a throne of rotting Primarch flesh, the remains of his loyalist brothers preserved in eternal decay. We bring the only true immortality, he rasps to billions through plagued Vox networks. Acceptance of death's inevitability. Yet something unexpected occurs. The mortal servants of the four gods begin to question their masters. Slaanish's endless pleasure palaces, once the ultimate reward, become prisons of sensation from which there is no escape. The Dark Prince's chosen champions, drowning in excess, find themselves numb to all but the most extreme stimuli. Their desperate search for new sensations drives them to cruelties that shock even demons. Khorne's skull mountains grow so high, they pierce the atmospheres of conquered worlds. Blood flows in rivers so vast, they can be seen from orbit. Arterial red channels cutting across continents. But the blood god's insatiable hunger means his followers can never rest. The strong devour the weak until only the strongest remain, then turn on each other in an endless cycle. Is this victory? Asks a blood-soaked world eater, standing atop a mountain of skulls that includes his own battle brothers. Or another form of imprisonment? The terrible irony emerges. In their total victory, the Chaos gods have eliminated the very concept of resistance. Without opposition, without the Imperium's desperate struggle against corruption, chaos itself begins to stagnate. The gods turn their attention to the few remaining pockets of resistance: Craftworld Eldar, Tau enclaves, Necron tomb worlds. But these provide only temporary amusement. The true sport was always humanity and its corpse god emperor. And so, the unthinkable occurs. The Chaos gods, in their eternal competition, begin to create new opponents for themselves. New empires rise from the ashes of the old, cultivated by the ruinous powers, solely to be corrupted and destroyed again. But what happens when these artificial creations develop their own form of resistance, one that even the Chaos gods never anticipated? The Emperor's death came not with thunder, but with silence. For 10,000 years, the Golden Throne had sustained his broken form, the arcane machinery humming with a sound like distant screams. Now, as the last custodian fell, his golden armor splashed crimson, that hum stuttered and died. On Terra, billions felt it simultaneously. A cold emptiness. The sudden sensation of being utterly alone in a hostile universe. In the throne room itself, the air grew thick with the metallic tang of ozone and ancient blood. The temperature plummeted as frost formed on the bodies of the slain. First, Captain Abaddon stood before the massive construct, his black armor slick with the ichor of gods and men. "Father," he whispered, using a title that wasn't his to use, "I have come to claim your inheritance." The corpse on the throne didn't answer. It never would again. Across the galaxy, a psychic shockwave rippled outward at the speed of thought. On a million worlds, psychers' heads exploded in fountains of gore. Navigator houses fell silent as their members clawed out their third eyes, unable to bear the sudden darkness where the Astronomicon had once shined. The smell of burning flesh filled the corridors of every Imperial vessel as their Geller fields failed. The screams lasted only moments. On Holy Terra itself, the sky split open. The veil between real space and the immaterium, held together by the Emperor's will for millennia, tore like wet parchment. Reality hemorrhaged as demons poured through by the millions, their cackling laughter drowning out the death screams of humanity's cradle. The Astronomicon, humanity's guiding light, blinked out like a candle in a hurricane. Across the galaxy, Imperial ships drifted blind. Entire battle fleets vanished into the warp, never to return. Those fortunate enough to be in real space found themselves stranded, cut off from all communication and reinforcement. Within days, the carefully constructed Imperium began to unravel. Within weeks, it collapsed. The Chaos Gods feasted. Khorne's brass throne flowed with fresh blood as war consumed 10,000 worlds. Nurgle's garden bloomed with new plagues as despair weakened immune systems and warp-tainted diseases spread unchecked. Tzientch's impossible libraries filled with the final thoughts of trillions. And Slaanesh gorged on the exquisite agony of a species watching its extinction unfold. On Terra, Abaddon placed the Emperor's withered skull upon a pike of blackened ceramite. The remaining population, those not sacrificed or driven mad, were herded into vast flesh factories. Their bodies would become the raw material for a new age. "This is not the end," Abaddon announced to his lieutenants as they knelt before him in the ruined palace. "This is apotheosis." Behind him, the golden throne, now a monument to failure, began to transform. Its gold tarnished and twisted, reshaping into something new. A portal, a doorway large enough to allow something truly massive to step through. And in the depths of the warp, 4 brothers who had once been Primarchs stirred, sensing their chance to return. The galaxy had fallen. But what emerged from its corpse would be far worse than death. The galaxy would be carved into 4 nightmarish domains, each reflecting the terrible nature of its patron deity. This wouldn't be conquest as mortals understand it. This would be reality itself, surrendering to madness. Khorne's realm would stretch across what was once Segmentum Solar and Obscurus. The skies above Terra, now a massive skull throne, would glow perpetual crimson, raining hot blood that sizzled as it struck the metal and bone architecture below. The constant percussion of war drums would echo between worlds, felt more than heard, vibrating through every surviving human's chest cavity. Each breath would taste of copper and salt. Each footstep would sink into ground, saturated with gore. The lucky would die in Khorne's endless battles. The damned would be reforged, their flesh and souls hammered into weapons on anvils that once were imperial cathedrals. Blood for the blood god wouldn't be a battle cry anymore. It would be the fundamental law of physics. Nurgle's domain would consume Segmentum Tempestus, transforming it into a festering garden of decay. Plague worlds would orbit dying stars, their surfaces covered in bubbling lakes of pus and forests of intestinal flora that swayed in winds carrying spores of 1,000 diseases. The sensation of maggots eternally writhing beneath one's skin would become normal. The sweet, cloying stench of rot would permeate everything. Food, water, even the recycled air of survival bunkers. Those who refused Grandfather Nurgle's gifts would experience pain without the mercy of death, their bodies regenerating only to rot again. Tzeentch would claim the knowledge-rich Ultima Segmentum, including the ruins of Mars, reality would fragment into crystalline labyrinths where physical laws changed with each passage. Libraries containing impossible books would stand where fortress monasteries once towered, their pages whispering contradictory truths directly into the minds of readers. Colors unknown to human perception would burn retinas and sanity simultaneously. Time would flow backward, sideways, or in loops. Former imperial scholars would be transformed into screaming grimoires, their skin becoming parchment inscribed with forbidden knowledge that rewrites itself hourly. Slaanesh would rule Segmentum Pacificus, transforming it into a realm of impossible sensation. Entire planets would become pleasure palaces, where the boundary between agony and ecstasy vanished completely. The air itself would caress exposed nerve endings with the delicacy of a torturer's blade. Every sound would trigger cascading waves of pleasure or pain, too intense for minds to process. Former hive cities would become labyrinthine halls of excess where the concepts of consent, restraint, and moderation would be forgotten memories. The most horrifying aspect wouldn't be the torture. It would be how quickly victims would learn to crave it. Between these kingdoms, the great game would continue eternally. Demonic legions would war across realities, using damned human souls as currency, weapons, and territories. The laws of physics, time, and biology would become suggestions rather than rules. And somewhere in this nightmare, the last loyal space marine would clutch his bolter with trembling hands, wondering if the Emperor had truly abandoned them, or if this hell was exactly what humanity deserved all along. In the 507th year of Chaos Ascendant, the final bastions of imperial resistance stood like islands in a screaming sea of madness. Terra was long lost, a bleeding wound in reality where the Golden Throne once stood. But humanity, stubborn to its core, refused extinction. On Titan, the last Grey Knight's fortress monastery orbited a moon no longer recognizable. The silver-armored warriors numbered fewer than 200, down from thousands. Their psychic hoods glowed perpetually as reality itself pressed against their walls, whispering promises of power, of release. "We are the last true sons of the Emperor," Brother Captain Aminar whispered, his voice hoarse from screaming battle prayers for decades. His face, once handsome, now bore ritual scars that leaked silver blood as warp energies saturated even their sanctified halls. The temperature dropped suddenly. Frost formed on ceramide armor. The distinctive smell of ozone and copper, the scent of reality thinning, permeated the chamber. "They're coming again," Sister Epistolary Varn said, her augmetic eye whirring as it focused on nothing visible. "The 13th assault this month." Beyond Titan, scattered across what was once Imperium space, other pockets of resistance endured. The Tau Empire had retreated to their core worlds, their philosophy of the greater good twisted into something unrecognizable as they adapted to survive in a galaxy ruled by emotion and excess. On Macraga, Ultramarine successors had built a fortress world that repelled demonic incursions through sheer discipline and tactical brilliance. But each victory cost them. Each battle claimed warriors who would never be replaced. The grinding sound of their void shield straining filled theoretical Captain Numitor's ears as he watched the orbital scans. The warp storms surrounding their system pulsed like heartbeats, constricting tighter with each passing year. "We cannot hold forever," his lieutenant said, touching the symbol of Gilliman on his pauldron. The ceramite was worn smooth from the repeated gesture of millions of similar prayers. "We don't need forever," Numitor replied. just long enough. The Necrons had retreated into their tomb worlds, sealing themselves away from a universe that had become anathema to their ordered minds. The Eldar that survived existed only in the deepest webway paths, their souls now the most precious currency in a galaxy ruled by the dark gods. In the void between systems, rogue trader vessels and Imperial Navy remnants formed nomadic fleets, never staying in one place long enough for the hunting demons to find them. The scratching of claws against hull plates became a lullaby for children born knowing only flight. On the bridge of the last luminary, Admiral Herrings pressed her palm against the viewing portal. The glass felt unnaturally warm, almost feverish, as the void itself seemed to pulse with malevolent life. Outside, impossible colors swirled where stars once shone. "We've intercepted a transmission," her Vox officer reported, his voice trembling with something that might have been hope. "From Titan. The Grey Knights claim they've found something in the Emperor's last writings." Herrings turned, her face illuminated by the sickly light of the warp-tainted void. "What did they find?" "A way back," he whispered. "A way to undo what has been done." But as the message finished playing, the screeching of reality tearing open drowned all other sounds. Through the viewport, a massive eye blinked open in the void, focusing directly on their tiny vessel. In the 42nd millennium, the Eye of Terror no longer remained a wound in reality's fabric. It had become reality itself. The stars themselves wept blood as the Immaterium consumed real space. What began as cracks in the veil between dimensions had become a torrent, a flood of madness washing away the laws of physics like sandcastles before a tsunami. On what was once holy Terra, Lord Abaddon stood atop the broken remnants of the Golden Throne. The Emperor's desiccated corpse lay before him, not dead, but transformed. Writhing tendrils of warp energy pulsed from the ancient being's chest, his face contorted in an eternal scream that echoed across dimensions. "Is this not perfection?" Abaddon whispered to the thing that had once been the master of mankind. The smell of burning psychic energy filled the air, copper and ozone, sweet decay and bitter promise. Across the galaxy, trillion-strong populations surrendered to mutation. Planetary surfaces rippled like water as reality became malleable. Children were born with kaleidoscope eyes that saw all possible futures simultaneously. Their screams harmonized with their laughter. The surviving space marines, those who had resisted chaos to the bitter end, found themselves hunted not by enemies, but by their own memories. Phantom bolter rounds tore through ceramite as easily as reality tore through logic. Their gene seed betrayed them, transforming loyal warriors into writhing masses of tentacles and teeth. On Macragge, the preserved body of Rabaut Guilliman liquefied inside his stasis field. The blue of his armor darkened to midnight as the Primarch's remains became a portal. From his chest burst a tide of Neverborn, demons wearing the faces of every ultramarine who had ever fallen in battle. The Tyranid hive fleets, drawn to the psychic beacon of humanity's suffering, found themselves consumed instead. Their bioships dissolved into the warp, their genetic material repurposed by cackling lords of change. The Great Devourer became the Great Devoured. The Necrons, ancient enemies of chaos, activated their most desperate protocols. Entire tomb worlds self-destructed rather than face corruption. Those who failed to do so in time became mockeries of their former selves. Living metal fused with screaming souls, their bodies housing demons that should never have been able to touch the material realm. The orcs discovered too late that their psychic gestalt field, the Wa, had become a conduit for Khorne's rage. Green skin split open to reveal red muscle beneath. Their joyous violence transformed into something deeper, darker, a hatred that consumed even their legendary resilience. Time itself fractured. In some regions of what was once the Imperium, a single second stretched for centuries. In others, millennia passed in heartbeats. Causality broke down entirely. Effects preceded causes. The dead walked before they lived, and through it all, the dark gods laughed. Their victory was total. Their dominion, absolute. Reality had become a playground for their whims, a canvas for their madness. But in the deepest shadows of this new hell, something stirred. Something ancient. Something that predated even the chaos gods themselves. For in the mathematics of infinity, even absolute power has its limits. And as reality died its final death, the laws of the universe prepared to enact one final, desperate contingency. The question was no longer what would happen if chaos won. The question now became, what comes after chaos? The stars themselves began to scream. As the great rift expanded beyond all natural boundaries, reality bent and fractured like brittle glass. The laws of physics, once immutable constants, became mere suggestions in a universe now ruled by the dark gods. On what remained of Holy Terra, Lord Commander Guilliman watched the skies transform. The familiar constellations that had guided mankind for millennia twisted into new, obscene configurations. Stars pulsed with unnatural colors, bleeding purples and gangrenous greens that had no place in the natural spectrum. It's as if the universe itself is being digested, whispered an astropath before her eyes liquefied and ran down her cheeks like mercury tears. Across the galaxy, the very fabric of reality began to warp. On worlds claimed by Nurgle, gravity ebbed and flowed like tides, crushing inhabitants under their own weight one moment, then sending them floating helplessly upward the next. The air itself turned viscous, thick with the sweet rot stench of decay that clung to lungs and dissolved tissue from within. Tzeentch's domains became labyrinths of impossibility. Buildings stood upside down, their foundations balanced perfectly on needle-thin spires. Water flowed uphill. Shadows moved independently of their casters. Those who survived described colors they could taste and sounds they could touch, sensory abominations that drove most to madness. In Slaanesh's territories, pleasure and pain became indistinguishable. The boundaries between bodies blurred. Entire populations fused into writhing, moaning flesh carpets that covered continents, each individual consciousness preserved just enough to experience eternal sensation. Khorne's worlds were perhaps the most straightforward in their horror. The ground became saturated with blood until it could absorb no more. Oceans turned crimson and then solidified into vast plains of scabbed tissue. The metallic tang of blood permeated everything, coating throats and lungs until breathing felt like drowning. In orbit around these corrupted worlds, void ships reported navigation systems failing catastrophically. The Astronomicon, long extinguished, gave way to new, malevolent beacons. Warp travel became simultaneously easier and more perilous as the barrier between real space and the immaterium thinned to translucency. Veteran navigators described the sensation as sailing through tissue rather than void. The ships themselves began to transform, corridors extending impossibly, machine spirits developing hungers and desires. Geller fields flickered and failed as the distinction between in the warp and in real space became increasingly meaningless. On 1,000 worlds, humans looked up at skies that no longer made sense. They felt the ground beneath them shifting, not just physically, but fundamentally. Reality itself was being rewritten. In the last imperial strongholds, tech priests frantically recorded measurements of physical constants that changed hourly. The speed of light, atomic weights, gravitational constants. Nothing remained stable. The universe is being remade in their image. Gilliman realized as he watched a distant star split into 4 distinct lights, each pulsing with the color of a different chaos god. But what truly terrified him wasn't the transformation of the material universe. It was the growing suspicion that this had always been the true nature of reality, that the orderly cosmos mankind had known for millennia had merely been a temporary anomaly, a brief island of stability in an ocean of chaos that was now reclaiming what had always been its own. The universe has fallen, but not everyone has surrendered. On forgotten moons and dead-end systems, small pockets of resistance cling to existence like blood to a wound. They are the last echoes of what once was the Imperium of man, ragged, starving, and running out of ammunition. In the ruins of Cadia's sister worlds, survivors huddle in radiation-soaked bunkers. Their skin peels from their bones as they whisper prayers to an emperor who can no longer hear them. Children born here have never known sunlight unfiltered through the haze of demonic energies that now saturate the atmosphere. Eldar craft worlds drift through the warp-tainted void, their infinity circuits burning with souls that refuse final consumption. The psychic screams of their dead echo through crystalline corridors as aspect warriors make their final stands against hordes that never tire, never end. On Mars, the last of the tech priests have sealed themselves within quantum vaults, the grinding of ancient gears their only companions. They clutch fragments of standard template constructs to their mechadendrite-riddled chests, preserving knowledge that no one may ever use again. The Space Marines, once 10,000 strong across 100 chapters, now number in the hundreds. They operate in kill teams of 3 or 4, striking from the shadows before disappearing again. Their armor is patchwork, their weapons failing. Yet they fight on. We are the last heartbeat of humanity, whispers Brother Tarsus of the Ultramarines, his once proud blue armor now scorched black. When we fall, the species dies with us. The Resistance has no hope of victory. Their actions are not strategic but symbolic, final acts of defiance against a darkness that has already won. In the depths of what was once Holy Terra, now a bleeding wound in reality known as the Neverborn Throne, a single sister of battle stands guard over a small chapel. Inside, 27 children, the last pure human souls in the sector, sleep fitfully. She has not removed her armor in 7 years. The bolter in her hands has 3 rounds remaining. The God Emperor protects, she murmurs, though her eyes tell a different story. But these last bastions are not long for existence. One by one, the candles of resistance are being snuffed out. The Lords of Chaos do not hurry. They have eternity to play with their prey. These final defenders of humanity and order represent more than just military resistance. They are the last repositories of what once made the universe worth fighting for. Compassion, sacrifice, honor, duty. Concepts that have no meaning in the new reality. We look at these desperate few and see ourselves, clinging to principles in a world that increasingly rewards their absence. How long would we hold out against the tide of darkness? What principles would we abandon first? When the universe falls to chaos, the real question isn't about survival, but about what parts of ourselves we're willing to sacrifice to continue existing. If you've made it this far into the darkness with me, perhaps you too wonder what you would do in humanity's final hours. Subscribe to continue our journey through the grim darkness of fallen futures. Because in understanding fictional horror, we learn to recognize its real-world shadows. The galaxy has fallen, not with a heroic last stand, but with a whimper that echoes through the immaterium like the death rattle of hope itself. The Emperor's corpse, finally allowed to die, provides the last feast, his psychic essence, cultivated over 10,000 years of sacrifice, devoured in moments by the chaos gods. The golden throne, once humanity's beacon, now a cold, metal skeleton picked clean of divinity. Across what was once the Imperium, reality itself dissolves. The laws of physics bend and break as the veil between real space and the warp disintegrates completely. Planets transform into demon worlds, each a nightmarish reflection of its conquering god's nature. On Khorne's worlds, blood falls as rain. The ground pulses like exposed muscle, and mountains form from the skulls of the conquered. The survivors fight eternally, their bodies regenerating only to be torn apart again in an endless cycle of violence. Tzeentch's domains shimmer with impossible colors. Libraries of forbidden knowledge stretch infinitely, their pages squirming with living text that rewrites itself as you read. Those who seek understanding find their bodies twisting, growing eyes where there should be none, their thoughts fragmenting across 1,000 parallel minds. In Nurgle's gardens, disease becomes art. Pus-filled flowers bloom and burst, releasing spores that transform flesh into bubbling, sentient colonies of bacteria. The sensation of rot becomes pleasure. Decay becomes creation. Slaanesh crafts perfect hells of sensation. Every nerve ending alive with exquisite agony, every desire fulfilled until fulfillment itself becomes torture. Pleasure and pain, indistinguishable. Consciousness stretched across millennia of perfect sensation. But the true horror is not what happens to the body. It's what happens to the soul. Each human soul, once destined for the Emperor's protection, now becomes eternal currency in the great game, consumed, digested, and repurposed as the raw material of demons. Identity dissolved, selfhood erased, eternal consciousness without control. The gods grow fat on this endless harvest. Their powers swell beyond comprehension, beyond even their own control. The great game intensifies until reality itself cannot contain their conflicts. And then, the final, terrible truth emerges. The gods begin to consume each other. Khorne absorbs Slaanesh's essence, violence, and pleasure, becoming one terrible force. Nurgle and Tzeentch merge in a paradoxical union of stagnation and change. The warp itself convulses as the pantheon collapses inward, until only one remains, one singular consciousness, one all-consuming god formed from the merged aspects of four. The warp and real space become one unified hell, with every soul that ever was or will be trapped within its infinite awareness. This is chaos undivided in its ultimate form, not as a philosophy, but as a singular entity that has devoured everything, even itself. And what of us, who look upon this fictional apocalypse with fascination? What does our attraction to such darkness reveal? In a world increasingly divided by ideology, do we not see echoes of these gods in our own destructive patterns? The true horror of chaos isn't that it's alien, it's that it's all too human. If this glimpse into the dark potential of the Warhammer universe has stirred something within you, perhaps you're ready to delve deeper. Subscribe and join us as we continue to explore the shadows where fiction and reality blur into uncomfortable truth.